Welcome, everybody, to Connecting the Digital Footprint webinar series. I'm really excited to be able to bring this to you all and have wonderful presenters join me. So before we get started, just let me say this. If you, your loved one, or somebody you know is battling or has succumbed to this terrible coronavirus, just know that you're in our hearts and our minds. We know it's a terrible thing. And then just real quick, what I want to say about the recording, it's not to make the conversation awkward. It's that we just really have a lot of bright minds around this topic of digital equity, and capturing those nuggets are critical. So, we are living in interesting times, so we really are trying to capture this and see where it takes us. We want to memorialize it, and, who knows what's next. So, with that being said, morning. My name is Terry Lee. I'm the Community Affairs Specialist for the FDIC Atlanta region. And I help bankers, community partners, and other stakeholders identify community development opportunities and implement strategies that are responsive to the credit, investment, and service needs of those communities. So like I said, welcome to the Connecting the Digital Footprint webinar series. With this wholesale shift to online learning within our education system, the series really brings our focus to stabilizing LMI youth and their communities. So over the next several weeks, industry experts like the ones you see here will walk us through systematic approaches that advance digital equity in the low and moderate income communities in support of financial and economic inclusion. So for our first webinar today, Increasing Digital Access for Low and Moderate Income Youth, Laying the Foundation, we examine strategies to increase broadband access, leveraging CRA or the Community Reinvestment Act, and other resources. So the way I'd like to tee this up, what we are going to attempt to do over the next month or so is deliver a series of webinars. And thank you for joining this first one. And we're focused on key aspects around digital equity. Now, many learners lack the basic essentials to connectivity: broadband, laptop, desktop, Wi-Fi, tech support, and resources, and cybersecurity. So the topic, digital equity, is not new. However, the times we are in are new, and yes, I'm going to say it, the new normal. So throughout today's discussion, we may affirm what you already know, excite the possibilities of opportunities, connect you with human capital, and at a very minimum, give you a touch point for the weeks to come. So turn up the volume on your headset or speakers so others can hear, take some copious notes, and years down the road, we're going to be sitting around talking about COVID-19 and how it changed the world, changed the communities, and changed us. As you sit around telling your story, I hope there's a part that speaks to your great role in helping create digital equity. So this webinar series has increased the breadth and depth of who can hear the information. However, we are limited on the depth. So pay attention here. It's important to stay connected and find those connections to drive this conversation in our local market. Thank you for joining today's conversation around a very timely topic, connecting the digital footprint, laying the foundation. And before I end my liberty here, opening up, let me just say this. Our FDIC director, Mark Pierce, shared a simple quote with us some time back, and it goes, "The only way out is through." So this is a simple but powerful quote because it resonated with me. Now is not the time to be timid. It's okay to be that voice. It's okay to be that unsung hero who can help connect others. Figure out what ideas spark you here in this conversation, and let's get ready to take some action. So without any further ado, let me introduce a couple of our panelists. I just want to bring them online real quick. Give them a second or so just to give you a quick background. We have joining us Christine Fox. Christine, are you there?
Yes. Hi. Good morning.
Wonderful, wonderful. Christine, just real quick, give us a quick background, and then we'll move on.
Sure. So my name is Christine Fox. I'm the Deputy Executive Director with CETA, the State Ed Tech Directors Association. CETA is a nonprofit that serves state education agency leaders in a variety of areas related to digital learning and ed tech. My background personally comes from, first and foremost, as a classroom teacher, a curriculum coach, and I've been with CETA over 15 years. So we advocate and support digital learning opportunities for students over time, which all of our work has come to full circle now in these days of COVID-19. And additionally, with two teenagers in the house, my personal life and professional life are now overlapping as I have remote learning happening simultaneously here. So excited to be here, excited to also learn from the other participants and learn more about, the way the banking industry can support this work.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Christine. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Terry. Michael Flood. I currently lead strategy for a company called Kajeet. I've spent about 20 years in the telecommunications industry. The past 15 of those 20 years focused on education and specifically, student use of broadband and tools to access broadband to improve education. And then almost the past 10 years at Kajeet in particular focused on digital equity and what up until the start of COVID-19 was referred to as the homework gap and is now more broadly the learning gap, as now all students, of course, are engaged in distance learning and need the same connectivity. And it's not just homework anymore, it's their full education. I'm also on the board of directors for COSN, the Consortium on School Networking, which is the professional organization for CTOs at school districts throughout the United States and internationally. So very pleased to join the call and talk a little bit about, the telecom side of these solutions and how we're helping to address this in low to moderate income populations.
Wonderful. Glad to have you, Michael. Robert, his friends call him Bob.
Thanks, Terry. Hi, this is Bob McLaughlin, and I'm Executive Director for the National Collaborative for Digital Equity, which is a national nonprofit whose mission is to mobilize partnerships at the local, state, and national level to remove digital divide barriers to economic and educational opportunity, and really thrilled to be part of this wonderful team. Thanks, Terry, for pulling us all together.
Wonderful. Glad you can join us, Bob. Carol? You might be on mute, giving us her very pointed speech here.
Oh,
Carol,
thank you for reminding me. Technology always fails us when we need it most, doesn't it? It does. Again, my name is Carol Miller. I'm the Director of Broadband Technology at the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs within the Division of Economic Development. I've been in the position for 11 years, working with constituents, cranky constituents across the state in need of broadband. Prior to that, I had 19 years in the industry, and my connections within the industry as well as nonprofit connections and the University of New Hampshire. I've worked many initiatives across the state and so happy to be here to share what I've learned of how to build capacity within communities to get the job done. So thank you for inviting me.
No, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time out today and sharing this timely information with the folks on the call. So with that, let me shift here. So just a quick rundown of today's webinar agenda. Welcome introductions, we did that. And then as you can see, we have a robust conversation ahead of us. And because of that, time is of the essence, so I just kind of want to get right to it and start giving you some information. Here's a quick shot of what we have when I talked about the series. Here's some upcoming webinars after this one. So the idea is to kind of build. So if you're on this call, we'd like to see you on the next one. Keep those ideas going and keep the conversation moving forward. And of course, our panelists. So, and I do have to say this, the views expressed in this presentation are the presenters and do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So just a quick little disclaimer there. Now, we had brought up Community Reinvestment Act as a way to leverage this type of activity around digital equity. And because we have so many people on the call with varying degrees of understanding around the Community Reinvestment Act, I just wanted to level set briefly before hearing from our panelists. So speaking to that, the CRA is intended to encourage depository institutions, aka banks, to meet the credit needs of the community in which they are chartered to serve. The CRA also requires banks to be evaluated on how well they are meeting the entire needs of the community or communities. Loans, investments, and services within a bank's assessment area are evaluated. The Community Reinvestment Act, or ACT, places an emphasis on providing loans, investment, and services to the LMI communities and individuals to receive community development consideration. So the Community Reinvestment Act defines community development as an activity that revitalizes or stabilizes LMI geographies, designated disaster areas, distressed or underserved non-metropolitan middle-income geographies. And how do they do that? By providing affordable housing for LMI individuals, community services targeted to LMI individuals, and activities that promote economic development by financing businesses and farms. Again, taking a look at how responsive is the bank to the community credit needs and where they're chartered. In addition, the CRA does not specify dollar amounts or percentage requirements since credit needs vary among communities. So, and then also what I want to do is pivot to the bankers that are on the call real quick. When it comes to COVID-19 CRA-related questions, FDIC continues to work towards a collective response. And I have listed here, and I'll show you on the next slide, some guidance and resources that you all can use. And let me pull that up real quick so that you can see. So here's the resources for the regulators. For the bankers, which was provided by the regulators, FDIC, OCC, and FRB. So that kind of level sets everything. And I know CRA is such a broad topic, and how to decipher what it is and what's required and whatnot. But I think today, with today's conversation and why we're coming together, is because we have this wonderful topic around digital equity. And what we decided to do was, instead of talk about digital equity in its entirety, we wanted to break it down into pieces throughout this, and that's why we have created this webinar series, because each piece is really focused and each piece is critical. So without any further ado, I wanted to turn the conversation over to Christine, where we're going to have a back and forth and get some information, and then we'll go through the other panelists. So with that, Christine, welcome again.
Thank
you. I wanted to start by having you give us the definition of broadband, since that's today's topic, and you're first up on the hook.
No problem. So it is kind of funny to me because there are definitely more folks on the panel with more technical expertise. However, I will share that broadband is a high-capacity transmission technique frequencies so that we can communicate simultaneously over the internet. Most of us may remember DSL, when you used to plug your phone in and be able to connect to the internet that way. There's fiber optic and cable. A lot of folks now, through their cable companies or fiber optic through one of the telcos, have access to broadband at home, and then in some remote areas, that also folks leverage satellite. And so we think of broadband as our way to access the internet. As I said, there's other leaders here that can definitely get into the very techie side of things, but I don't know that that's necessary for this call. And then we also think of access via Wi-Fi, right? And so that's through the cellular towers, and Michael would definitely be one to be able to share in detail how all of that works. And you hear and see the commercials, 3G, 4G, now 5G, but all of this is really to talk about how we get access to the internet in our homes and as we're mobile.
And thank you for that quick definition. And it makes sense. You know, we want quicker speed, greater access. So taking that broadband idea, I know you've been working on the broadband imperative. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So CEDA's work around broadband, specifically the need for high-speed, quality, seamless access in schools, and that was in the brick-and-mortar buildings, really launched in 2008 when CEDA published the Class of 2020 Action Plan for Education. And that's when we started talking about if we are truly going to have digital learning, educational technology in place, if we're going to transform the learning spaces, then the need for access and quality access is imperative. Interestingly, we are seeing right now the graduation ceremonies for all of the class of 2020. So those students were in kindergarten when we started talking about this work, and here we are, still focused on it. We are, in 2012, CEDA published the first official broadband imperative paper, and that was the first time that any organization had published capacity targets. So what is the minimum bandwidth that a school would need per student or average per student in order to have seamless digital learning? And when we talk about seamless digital learning, we're really talking about the fact that a teacher never should have to think about, do I have enough broadband for that? Will I have enough access for that to do an activity in their room? Whether it's having all of their students online at one time, or if they're video conferencing with NASA, or they're collaborating with other classes or teachers across the country. And through that, we worked with the public sector, the private sector, our members, state leaders that work on state networks to provide broadband. And then since that time, we published also in 2016 the Broadband Imperative 2, and then just in November 2019, the Broadband Imperative 3. We have evolved those capacity expectations over time, and also technology has changed. There's more fiber available in schools. The technology tools sometimes don't use as much bandwidth as they did when they first started. And then the cost structure of consortium purchasing, all of those things have changed over the last 10 plus years. We are excited to share that our 2012 recommendations for broadband capacity in schools were adopted by the FCC as recommendations through the E-rate program. And so we work with those offices regularly. CEDA hosts a group of E-rate coordinators where we're always looking and talking about the capacity in the school building. Now, since our first paper in 2008 all the way through 2019, we have also talked about a recommendation for seamless access for students at home. CEDA advocates for students having the availability of devices, just as most of us do for work. We are trying to work to prepare students for college and careers where they need access to a device. Most CEDA members would argue that it would be something larger than a phone to be able to not only consume content, but create content. And then in order to do that, students need access at home to be able to complete their homework, apply for college, apply for jobs, and so we have been advocating and recommending home access as well. We do not have specific targets for that home access, and of course, with COVID-19, the need for access at home has been completely elevated. So our recommendations, and as schools and districts scrambled around the country to provide access to students at home, this inequity of access became very apparent. And so we are proud of the work we've done. Sometimes, we wish we weren't still talking about this, but we're happy now that the entire world is very engaged in the need for equity to access both on and off campus.
And when you mentioned the off-campus, the homework gaps, which we mentioned before, can you speak to that just real briefly more?
Sure. So the homework gap, which is a term that was really kind of launched by Commissioner Rosenworcel, one of the FCC commissioners, to talk about the fact that most students have requirements to complete work at home, and the gap of students that have lack of availability to that access. Now, one thing that is a challenge is the ability to identify exactly how many students are truly lacking that access. I mean, the best or latest research that's comprehensive per se, most in the education field reference the Pew Research study, but that's actually from 2017. So a lot has changed since then, that about 35% of households with K-12 age students lack access at home. That is an estimate too, and right now, even yesterday, we were on a call with state leaders talking about the fact that really schools, districts, and states are not 100% clear on who's not connected. And part of that is the fact that some schools had one-to-one digital learning, and those schools were very aware of which students had to download information at school in order to complete their work at home, and so they were aware of what students may lack access. In other cases, digital learning was just like a spark that was beginning in those schools, and so they didn't have that information. And so with COVID-19, districts scrambled to survey parents, states are surveying families, but of course, if you don't have access, they may or may not be responding to those surveys. And also, anyone that collected data previously, and some states did collect data on K-12 access at home, we weren't talking about the kind of access that everyone needs today, right? So now we need access all day long, and maybe for myself, it's myself and my two daughters. We may all be on a video conference at the same time. And so, there's questions about families that said, yeah, we have Wi-Fi, but it was just the parents had a phone that had a hotspot. And the level of access they need now is truly different. And then, of course, there are huge gaps across the country in remote locations where it's not even an affordability situation, but it's the unavailable access to broadband or Wi-Fi.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification, Christine. And I see it out here. I hear about it. I know an educator experiencing exactly what you're saying. So thank you for the remark. Now, in the interest of time, I want to shift to Michael and bring him into this conversation. Michael, are you still there?
I am. Thank you, Terry. I appreciate that.
Wonderful.
So I want to talk a little bit more about education broadband and what we mean by that. Digital equity is, of course, a very broad topic, and we're very focused today on the needs of our students. K-12 also, I should say higher ed as well, but primarily we've been focused on K-12, and the need to connect to broadband for educational use. So when we talk about education broadband at Kajeet, we are referring to broadband that is designed to help students accomplish their educational mission and to participate in the education venue of their choice, their local school district, or any other educational opportunity, wherever they are and whenever they wish to engage in that. In the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen a rapid shift to digital learning. So, 55 million plus students in the United States, now all impacted by school closures. And even before COVID, 14% of households with school-age children did not have access to the internet, and 1 in 5 students had expressed that they had trouble completing homework assignments because of a lack of internet access. In fact, the coining of the term homework gap was principally related to teachers assigning homework that required being online compared to students who did not have that access. So we have seen that. Now, the presence of internet networks, and especially wireless networks, is fairly pervasive throughout school districts, and we're seeing those used to connect school buildings, school buses, employees from their cell phones to their own Wi-Fi hotspots, and now increasingly used to connect student devices. So students can get connectivity in the home, in the community, or directly within a device that they carry with them, and use that anywhere they go. For our part, we have helped districts focus on several different ways of using broadband access. Putting Wi-Fi onto school buses is one that has been used increasingly. We were doing that before COVID-19 to return the time students spent on school buses and make that time they could use for their academics on long routes and athletic trips, things like that. During COVID-19, a lot of those school buses that had that Wi-Fi capability were actually used to park in communities to provide additional Wi-Fi hotspots that students and households could drive up to, park their car, and get work done. If they didn't have access in their home, it was an easy way to reach Wi-Fi out into the community. We've also seen a lot of use of portable Wi-Fi hotspots that are backed up by any of the cellular networks, and we've seen that LTE service embedded in devices as well. Now, for broadband to be educationally specific, it does need to be compliant with CIPA, the Children's Internet Protection Act. So that is a federal requirement for any educational institution that receives E-rate funds and provides internet access. That also makes sure not just that kids are protected from harmful content, but also that they are on task, that they're not using that internet access to, watch Saturday morning cartoons, for example. Very age appropriate, but not educationally on task. Time of day controls we've also seen have been very popular. So many schools will look and say, we need students to get enough sleep. Maybe for our elementary school students, we want access to shut off at 10 o'clock at night. Maybe for our high school students, 11 o'clock or midnight. Turn back on the next morning so that they're not distracted by the internet when they should be sleeping. Also, the reporting and analytics. Right now, these students are not sitting in front of their teacher. The ability to actually see how they're using this access, where they're going, what tools they're accessing, whether the access is actually making an impact and being used by the students is very important. Because there are many different wireless networks out there, and they have different coverage footprints, it's also important to be able to leverage all of those. So, we have an example of one district in Virginia that uses 5 different carrier LTE networks because the coverage in different neighborhoods varies. And so, that's important that you can leverage multiple networks using wireless technology. And I'm certainly happy to answer additional questions on this topic during the Q&A. Thanks, Terry.
Well, wonderful. And just real quick before I let you go, have you been able to reach folks in rural or tribal lands?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with over 1,700 school districts now across the United States and Canada, including all 50 states. And we actually just recently initiated some work with the Bureau of Indian Education that reaches specifically onto Native American and tribal lands. The main prerequisite for us, for what we do, is that there does need to be a network there. And of course, networks do cover, almost 100% of the United States population, but there are still areas where they do not reach. And so there is that limitation. But even on Native American and tribal lands, cellular networks do exist. And if a student doesn't have a great cell signal in their home, it is often very easy for them to take a portable Wi-Fi hotspot and get to the nearest cell signal, which it may be much further, much more difficult for them to get to, a public Wi-Fi hotspot, for example.
Wonderful, and thank you for that additional bit of information, Michael. So, okay, well, I want to pivot, and Carol, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Carol, just kind of start you off. Just curious, when it comes to building broadband capacity, what key ingredients are needed, and what do you find is often missing?
Before I answer that, I just wanted to enhance for folks the definition of broadband is a speed. And why is this important? Broadband is defined by the Federal Communications Commission as a 25 megabit down connection by a 3 megabit connection up. If you do not have that speed designation of connection, you do not have broadband. And woefully today, 25 megabit download connection isn't even enough to handle Christine and her family, who are all on the internet. And I say that because when we build capacity, and I did see a quick message come across the screen about how do we get municipalities involved. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Municipalities need to become leaders in the field. They have control over the property, over the residents, and they need to become an active leader or partner in getting each and every community what I think is the infrastructure of the future, which is fiber to the premise. So leadership is oftentimes missing. The will to do change is sometimes missing, but building capacity starts at the grassroots level. When you attract your champions within the community, they are the people that go out and sell the idea. So building capacity is an ongoing process that happens in each and every community.
Wonderful, wonderful. And what do you find often is missing in this capacity building process?
Well, again, leadership is very important. You need to find the community members who are willing to step forward. And the other missing ingredient to any expansion of broadband or infrastructure in a community is funding. Funding is a big challenge. It can be a cornucopia of sources for funding to be able to bring infrastructure into a community and into each and every home. And that is beyond the educational needs, beyond the telemedicine needs, beyond the mobile cell carrier needs. I mean, it really is basic to everything that we are going to be doing in our future going forward. In New Hampshire, having worked in the field for 11 years, I have worked with many municipalities who are struggling across the state. They have rural populations that need access to not only broadband, but an affordable broadband for all. So getting communities on board, getting them to set goals and objectives to reach those goals are really the key. And we've developed toolkits in New Hampshire to help these communities come along.
Now, when you talk about having a community ready, are we talking about a broadband ready community? And if we are, what does that look like?
Well, the whole concept of a broadband ready community has to do with, number one, finding a single point of contact in each and every community, doing the legwork on mapping your community, going to the provider community and requesting information about where your facilities are within your town, and then looking at or sending out proposals for providers who are willing to come in and build the infrastructure of the future. And again, focusing on fiber to the premise. We have for so many years put Band-Aids on broadband across not only New Hampshire, but across the nation. And in order, I think, to be solidly moving forward, not to say that interim solutions won't help, but we need to keep our eye on the ball, and fiber is the way to go.
Wonderful, thank you. And with the interest of time here, I want to turn to our good friend Bob. Bob, you still there?
I sure am.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, well, you're gonna play cleanup for us here before we get to the Q&A portion of our discussion, and just wanted to, have you start by, I know that you and your colleagues at NCDE advocate for systematic digital equity and systemic inclusion. Can you explain these terms and why they matter?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we've been at this, as you know, Terry, and Michael and Carol and Christine know as well, we've been partnering on a variety of projects related to digital equity for quite some years, all of us on this panel. So this is a bit like alumni weekend for me to be with you all. In this work, we first advocated for Community Reinvestment Act support for addressing digital divide barriers to economic opportunity. And this notion of systemic digital equity first came about when, to our astonishment, we actually, without even launching a fully working pilot, proof of concept, to mobilize bank CRA support for digital equity in San Antonio, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas at that point said, we don't need a successful pilot to convince us. Our basic premise was that without digital access and skill, it's becoming increasingly impossible to find out about, apply for, prepare, and qualify for living wage jobs, which goes to the heart of the Community Reinvestment Act's purpose, which is to open up economic opportunity in low and moderate income areas. And so what we're basically saying is it makes no sense for banks to be spending $100 to $200 billion a year on economic opportunity and ignore digital divide barriers. And again, to our happy astonishment, the Federal Reserve Bank system, first in Dallas and then system-wide, and then talking with FDIC and Treasury, the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, they all agreed. And as we saw the pivot in terms of federal policy to allow banks to begin to receive credit towards their Community Reinvestment Act or CRA requirements by investing in digital equity in support of economic opportunity, our bias at that point, Terry, was don't just invest in the obvious things around only access to devices and broadband, as essential as those are. We're saying we also know from years and years of integrating technology in schools to actually result in gains in student learning opportunities and learning results, that we also need high quality content, good apps and software, and librarian support, and tech support. And that these are all essential dimensions of what we talk about as systemic digital equity. And so this first webinar is very exciting as an obvious to everybody involved essential food group in an effective approach to investing in removing digital divide barriers. And we're very excited that this is the first of several in a conversation going through each of those dimensions over time. That help?
Yeah, absolutely. And taking that piece when you had said that it's kind of an alum, we're all gathered here. This pandemic has really created opportunity, if you will. Taking the silver lining of things, and so this webinar here is a representation of that, because we're bringing folks together that normally may not have heard this information across the Southeast and beyond. And so the utility in having a strong backbone broadband access is very critical, and it just highlighted, and this pandemic has highlighted the need for that and the gaps that we're still facing. So when we start moving from the siloed conversations to a more cohesive conversation, where do you see the intersection of financial, economic, education, and digital inclusion?
Well, that's great. So speaking prescriptively, let me and then to describe what's happening so far, which is more neonatal in terms of what's happening around systemic approaches. So what you're referring to, Terry, is a whole nother lens around being systemic, which is digital inclusion in support of financial, economic, and educational. And our bias is that, yes, you need a systemic approach to the digital divide, and then to really help build robust pathways out of poverty, or particularly for low and moderate income kids who grow up in intergenerational poverty. We're finding that piecemeal, siloed approaches are the norm and that they're not working. That said, there are a lot of investments that are in silos around, for example, financial literacy, financial inclusion, which has to do with making sure that low-income kids and their families have access to checking accounts and other kinds of essential services, banking services. And then around economic inclusion, there are siloed efforts around building pathways to living wage jobs. In each of these cases, we're finding it before COVID became a reality in all of our lives. We were finding that it was an invisible, to many of us, problem that the digital divide was impeding efforts for low-income families to get access to banking services when banks are offering many of those services online, and if people can't get online, it's hard for them to find out about and apply for and to participate in online banking services. And a lot of banks are investing wonderful resources in online financial literacy programs. But again, if you're not online and you don't have access and you don't have the skill to know how to find them and to make sense of these kinds of resources, the effectiveness of those kinds of siloed investments is very limited because we're not integrating digital equity into these other approaches under CRA for investing in economic opportunity. That said, what we've begun doing in our world with the National Collaborative for Digital Equity is, for example, in Manchester, New Hampshire, we have Operation Lemonade, which is taking the notion of, like I think several of us have remarked, taking this terrible problem of the COVID pandemic and looking at how do we make some things better than they were before. Let's take advantage of the fact that everyone is radicalized about the extent and significance of the digital divide as a barrier to important life opportunities for online learning, for kids, for K-12 engagement, for access to jobs, and a whole variety of things. So what we're doing is we're in Operation Lemonade is we are pointing to providers of resources and helping low and moderate income communities and the banks that support them to connect low and moderate income individuals and families and communities to resource providers around free and deeply discounted broadband devices, tech support, content, and librarian support, and so on. And then what we're also doing, lastly, around a systemic approach, is we have, thanks to a bank CRA grant from a community bank, a bank or savings bank, we have to our knowledge, we believe, a first in the nation approach to systemic inclusion called VISTA, which is working with low and moderate income youth in an after-school setting, teaching them how to provide virtual support for fellow students and families and educators in Manchester, New Hampshire, but also combining that with Bank On, which is a national initiative that gets unbanked kids and their families banked. And what we're doing is combining financial inclusion with financial literacy, digital inclusion for these students, and with their help growing digital equity capacity in the community of Manchester. And we're also working with the New Hampshire Bankers Association, which, and like many state affiliates of the American Bankers Association, they have young bankers programs, which are pathways into banking careers and other careers that are living wage, that are in high demand, that are where they need to fill these jobs, and these would be great jobs for low and moderate income learners to fill. So what we're looking to do is to build an infrastructure and examples and to grow networks with our colleagues on this panel and beyond to grow capacity around removing digital divide barriers in these systemic ways. Does that help and make sense?
Oh, absolutely, in total sense. And that gives us, let me see here. That gives us some time to talk about the next step, which is going to be to pivot towards the Q&A portion. The Q&A portion of our webinar. So I would like to take some questions for the panelists and have us all.
Hey Terry, to start us off, could I just respond to a question that one of the participants raised around how do you get communities involved, municipalities involved? And I'd like to point to Carol Miller and some really lovely stuff that she's doing. What I can say is that our bias in approaching a statewide initiative to spur bank CRA and other investments to bring out fiber to a whole variety of underserved municipalities across New Hampshire, that one of the biases I think we all bring to this is the more that we can pool our resources as communities and work together on these issues, that we can get efficiencies by, for example, spurring CRA, and other forms of investment for broadband across entire regions of a state that are underserved.
Absolutely. Do we have any questions, operator?
I can begin that session if you don't mind. We will now begin a question and answer session. To ask a question from the phone line, please press *1. Ensure your phone is unmuted and record your name at the prompt. Your name is required to introduce your question. Alternately, you can ask your questions using the chat or Q&A functions on the webinar. One moment, please, for incoming questions.
While we're waiting for some questions to be raised orally, Terry, can I take another question from the chat?
Absolutely.
So we have a really exciting question from Mary Lou Carolyn about public libraries, and it reads: public libraries have been addressing the need for broadband and the digital divide generally. So public libraries have been addressing this need for eliminating the digital divide by having access to Wi-Fi and devices, for example, hotspot. Mobile hotspots to loan to patrons in the community. What else do you want to see our libraries do to address this effort to build an infrastructure for a systemic approach? What an exciting question. It brings out the carnivore in me. I will say that our fourth webinar in the series is going to bring in Susan Ballard, past president of the American Association of School Librarians, and some others about the crucial role that librarians, as Mary Lou is rightly saying, public libraries have been at this digital divide challenge indeed longer than any other stakeholder group that I know of since the early to mid 90s, where you could go into a public library nationwide and get access to broadband and help from a reference librarian on how to use the internet safely and effectively and how to use computers safely and effectively. So there's a lot that librarians have been doing. One of the things that I would like to just to stir it up and then defer to my colleagues is that one of the counterintuitive things I'd like to say as a digital equity advocate is that as we do improve equitable access to these essential digital equity resources, that it's really important we be mindful about some of the potential downsides around cyber safety, cyberbullying, device addiction, and social network addiction. And these are areas where librarians can really help us develop our digital literacy and media literacy skills. And I hope that's helpful, Mary Lou.
Terry, this is Carol. I'd like to respond to a question on chat as well, and it was directed at me. Why are we focusing on community instead of national resources to build broadband capacity? The question goes on to state that when we talk about broadband-ready communities, aren't we replicating the dysfunction of community disparities and explain why some school districts are underfunded and some are flush with resources? And it goes on further. I have to say that we've had 20, 30 years of national resources that have not gotten the job done. We continue to put Band-Aids on an industry that should be investing, but there's no return on investment. So if communities want to get ahead of the game, they need to become involved. And I certainly agree that history has proved that the funding of school districts has created disparities. I agree to that 100%. But I still think that the path to fiber to the premise for all in the communities is a shared cost between providers, between national resources, perhaps some CRA investments, and the local community, because there's no other way to get it done. I'm happy to take that question offline with Shelley anytime when you provide my contact information. So I'll leave my comments at that.
Wonderful. And we do have a question, a couple questions in the Q&A. Just wanted to pull those up for the panel. How do you recommend we approach our municipalities for this effort? How will they step forward, and what what do they need to do? I'm sorry, I'm having some glitches here.
I can answer that, Terry. And again, it goes to the concept of building capacity within the community. The community has community anchor institutions, such as the school. They may have a hospital, healthcare clinic. And if we all work together, and I mean together, we can change the landscape of broadband in the community, but we have to work together and not against each other. So I'll leave my comments there, and if other panelists have something they want to chime in on, please do.
This is Christine. I would concur with that. CETA works and participates as a member of Shelby, also the school's health and librarians group, talking about these anchor institutions and communities collaborating, whether it's them working with local providers and or at times digging their own fiber and running a network or in a collaboration. There's more flexibility right now with E-rate funds to do that specifically for schools. But CETA also advocates on the federal level for investments in such things, and I think that this COVID-19 has sparked obviously much more interest in the need for equity, the need for access to all communities. There's an example of in New Mexico where a provider put a cell tower on wheels and got it out to one of the Native American communities. So I think there's a lot going on, and as to reiterate, Carol, it's that level of communication. School districts function very differently. I'm in South Florida. Our entire county, 16th largest school district in the country, they would have to work with multiple municipalities. So, it really depends on the local community. A lot of the places where they lack access or lack affordable access often are rural, but that is not necessarily the case. And they really need to connect with those anchor institutions and community leadership to decide that this is something for everyone.
Wonderful. Well, I see we're coming up to the top of the hour. We have about 6 minutes left, and I want to use this time to say a couple things. One is the conversation is still going. It's robust. It's exciting. And I'm just glad to be a part of it and be able to offer this webinar series for the folks listening in and the others that are going to be joining us down the road. So in order to, what I said when we first started, to keep the conversation rolling, we do want to take the ideas shared today, some of the conversations that we had, and if the conversation sparks with you and you want to keep driving it in your local market, let us know so that we can continue to have this conversation and give it the attention that it needs as we kind of move forward with this whole pandemic and who knows where it's going to go. So with that, I also want to give us a little boost for the next webinar, the second one in our series, Equipping Low and Moderate Income Youth for the New Normal, Ensuring Computer Access. So that's scheduled for next week, Thursday, June 4th. And we definitely hope you all take time out to tune back in to hear some more information and get some great pieces of insight that our panelists are sharing. So with the remaining 5 minutes that we have here, if we don't have any more questions, I would just like our panelists to go around and provide one last parting word from your vantage point. If it's some type of innovation that you've seen, if it's a call to action that we need to have take place, now's your chance. Give us a minute of your time again, and before we cut you loose. So no particular order. Panelists, I'm gonna turn the floor back over to you.
Okay, I'll speak up. I just posted my email address within the chat box for those of you that want to learn more about how to build capacity within your community. my last thing that I want to leave you with, again, which I feel very strongly about, is that if we are going to invest in any technology today, we need to invest in fiber to the premise. Fiber to the premise serves to serve cell carriers. It serves everybody. It is the infrastructure of the future, and it will be able to carry the capacity or the speed of broadband that we're going to need, us and all our devices and our families, well into the future. So keep your eye on the ball. Fiber to the premise for all.
Thank you. Christine?
And if I could add, Terry,
Yeah.
that one of the messages that we really want to convey to, particularly to banking leaders who are involved in Community Reinvestment Act compliance, is that there is a lot of excitement in the policy arena around making sure that banking leaders know they can receive credit towards their CRA requirement by addressing digital divide barriers, broadband, and other dimensions around devices and so on, especially in support of economic inclusion and financial literacy. That these are very solid now. These are not far out, untested precedents. This is well established now, which is why, Terry, you and your colleagues very kindly are supporting this important conversation. And we're really excited to be forming these partnerships. The last thing I'll say, too, for my part, is that what Carol's doing, and I and some others in partnership with her in New Hampshire, is a great example of mobilizing municipalities, the State Municipal Association, regional planning commissions, the State Bankers Association, the Community Development Finance Authority, and a whole variety of other partners on pooling our expertise to identify the underserved areas of the state in terms of affordable broadband, estimating the cost to bring fiber out to these, and then developing investment vehicles. And there are some very exciting models for regional investments for affordable, sustainably affordable broadband. RS Fiber in Minnesota, and is it EC Fiber, I think, in Vermont, Carol?
Yes, yes, it is.
Wonderful.
So there's some good working examples of this. This is so my advice to municipal leaders and banking leaders is work in regions, and if you'd love us to help, we'd be delighted to do that. But also to say that as you build out broadband, we're very excited to be working with Michael and his colleagues at Kajeet, because in the mix, we look at, in our Lemonade approach, we look at, is there already affordable cable internet in a community? If not, what can we do to bring out mobile hotspots in areas where cell phone coverage provides affordable educational broadband? And then how do we build out fiber to the rest of the state?
Yeah. Okay, we are at the top of the hour. So 30 seconds or less. I'm sorry, Christine and Michael, but I do want to give you one last chance to say something before we cut the cord.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Just say thank you. All of CEDA's resources are openly available on our website to the general public. We are happy to connect you with your state education agency leaders, if that makes sense. We are working with Bob on supporting them and understanding the opportunities with CRA. And also, we encourage you to share that information. I put my information in the chat. Michael?
Same here. Thank you, Terry and Bob, for helping to organize this, and to the other panelists for participating. And feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is there on this slide. I'm also available on LinkedIn and Twitter and many other places. Thank you.
Well, wonderful, and I really appreciate the panelists sharing their insights today. I hope this is not the last time we see you. I look forward to you joining us in many other conversations as we move forward. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you next week for webinar number 2. Thank you all again. You have a great day.
This concludes today's conference. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your lines at this time. Speakers, please hold for post-conference.